Good morning. We come today to the 9th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. And in this particular story that Matthew gives us, we have Jesus coming to the town where he lived. And coming to the town, he comes into contact with a person who is paralyzed. Now, this may be the same story that is recorded for us in Luke's Gospel, where they lower the man down in his presence. But as Matthew sees it, and as Matthew records it, Jesus is coming to the town, and there he comes across this man who is crippled. Jesus sees him. Now, we don't know what the past was for this man. But as Jesus lived in a town, and remember, these were not large towns, they were quite small towns. The chances are he knew most people who were living there, and he knew quite a lot about them. And he comes across this man, and he says to him, "Your sins are forgiven." I don't know what he had done. I don't know what his life had been like. I don't know what his past was. I don't know what the stories were about his life. But Jesus does. And he looks at him and he says, "Your sins are forgiven." See, sin is the one thing that separates us from God. It's the point where we put up barriers against God. By the things we do and by what we are, we in fact prevent God from getting through to us in our lives. We're always doing it, each one of us, without exception. Why? Because naturally and in the very nature of ourselves, we are selfish, self-centered people who want to put ourselves first in everything. There's always this clash in society between me and everybody else. You know, I was once on the top of a bus in London, and I was looking down at all of these people passing, crowds and crowds of people. And I remembered something which I'd read a couple of days before. And I suddenly realized that each one of these people was in fact number one in their own lives. And everybody else had a secondary role. And I was number one in my life. And they all had a secondary role. For a brief moment of time, they were passing me. But in fact, I was number one. And as far as they were concerned, they too were number one. These thousands of people, each one of them was number one in their own lives. And everybody else had a secondary role to play. When we see the world in this way, then we can become very selfish. I remember, as a child, my parents speaking to me and saying quite simply, "Roy, you've got to put number one first. Don't think about other people too much. You've got to put number one first." Did you ever get that type of instruction? Well, whether you received it from your parents or not, I don't know. But each one of us thinks that way. We must put number one first. And put number one first, even against God. I must look after myself. That is what sin does to us. It puts up a barrier against other people and even against God himself. That barrier prevents other people being able to socialize with us properly, and it stops God from being able to bless us fully. That barrier has got to come down, because when that barrier comes down, then we can relate to other people, and then we can relate to God. And all that they love us and all the love they have for us will then be able to flow into our lives. And God's love can flow into our lives as well. Jesus sees this man, and I don't know what he had done. I don't know what is wrong in his life, but somehow the sin in his life had caused him to be crippled, physically crippled. He looks at the man, he says, your sins are forgiven. And people say, well, how can he say that? Only God can forgive sins. But Jesus looks even further to the man, he says, now pick up your bed and go home. His legs were strengthened. Whatever was crippling him was gone. He picked up his bed and he went out. See, God forgives sin. He wants to break down this barrier, and he wants to break it down in your life, just as he wants to break it down in mine. We're all sinners, but Jesus came to set us free and to liberate us from the effects of this sin.